Welcome to Annual Training for Summer Food Service Program Fiscal Year 2021, Best Practices for SFSP Feeding During COVID-19. 2020 has left all of us with a very different view of the Summer Food Service Program, and as we move into Fiscal Year 2021, many of the changes we've experienced remain. ODE-C&P is presenting this information for the annual SFSP training as a resource and guide for sponsors to have a clear understanding of the current guidelines. We'll provide information on program waivers available, requirements and flexibilities for serving children, what needs to be considered when deciding how to operate, and how to stay in compliance during those operations. The goal is for each sponsor to understand the choices available to them and how to go about making decisions. As situations change during the year, having a solid understanding of these factors will let sponsors respond accordingly. Additional resources and supporting materials with more detailed information are provided on the ODE Child Nutrition COVID-19 webpage. COVID-19 presented operators with a chance to show their responsiveness and flexibility when reacting to the unanticipated closures due to the pandemic. The actions taken by all of you are incredible and should be celebrated. As the fall of 2021 begins, Oregon is faced with a resurgence of COVID-19 cases, and the resulting guidance for sponsors regarding public health, education, and the governor's executive orders are changing along with them. There have also been multiple waivers issued for child nutrition programs in Oregon. There are a lot of moving pieces to keep track of, but we hope that this presentation will bring some clarity for sponsors as they move into fiscal year 2021. Probably the biggest waiver impacting summer food service programs is the nationwide waiver to allow SFSP and SSO through June 30 of 2021. This and the associated waivers, such as non-congregate feeding, parent pickup, area eligibility, mealtime restriction, first week site visit, and meal pattern flexibility, will allow many sponsors to continue the method of meal service that they've developed and refined from March through August. If your organization offered summer meals throughout the spring and summer of fiscal year 2020, you may have used grab and go or some sort of off-site meal service system. But as we move into fiscal year 2021, those meal service styles may need to change. If you're a school, you may be offering in-person classes for some of your students. You could be a nonprofit organization that's providing space for kids to work on their distance learning activities. Perhaps your organization is continuing off-site grab-and-go options, but would like to add bus routes, or maybe you'll need to do a combination or hybrid version of both in-person and off-site meals. Whatever your meal service may look like, there are important considerations for all service style options. Some sponsors may be providing meals to participants in an on-site setting, whether it's in limited cohorts or only for specific groups. ODE and the Oregon Health Authority have created guidance related to sanitation and safety during COVID. These guidelines provide strict cleaning and disinfecting procedures, as well as hand washing requirements. These safety and sanitation guides will be key for those who are providing care and meals on site. In addition, sponsors will want to consider the requirements for social distancing by arranging furniture and seating to provide more space for participants to spread out. If you're using a cafeteria, think of designating where a student will sit at each table. In the classroom, it will be important that desks are placed far enough from one another. The sharing of food, utensils, dishes, and other food service items is to be avoided. Sponsors will want to plan menus to not only fit meal pattern, but also with an eye to safety. Though prepackaged items may be scarce, individually bagging or cupping each participant's components may still provide a greater level of food safety than offering items in a large serving dish or on a serving line. Finally, the option to stagger mealtimes could allow for more space for participants to consume their meals and less potential for contact with others or the sharing of food. sponsors will need to consider time needed to clean and disinfect tables, chairs, utensils, and other meal service items. Avoid any sort of multi-touch surfaces, like condiment dispensers, water dispensers that are open for everyone, like water fountains, and salad bars. Think about the equipment that may be needed to transport or store items safely, especially if you'll be transporting items to multiple rooms or having to store meals safely for staggered meal times. Of course, consider the amount and type of personal protective equipment required for staff as well as participants. Gloves, masks, face shields may all be required. These costs can be considered an SFSP cost and charged to the Nonprofit Food Service Fund if used for meal service. Finally, think about staffing in the context of increased preparation and cleanup required and increased safety standards and other requirements specific to your locations. Many sponsors are now very familiar with providing meals off-site. Since March, meals have been offered via grab-and-go, bus routes, and even home deliveries. There are many considerations when providing meals to participants off-site. Food safety will always be a consideration, regardless of the meal service style. For off-site meals, sponsors may need different or additional equipment to store or transport the meals. Additionally, there are safety considerations once the families receive the meals, especially when sponsors are providing multiple days' worth of meals at one time. Remember that multiple days' worth of meals may require instruction on storage and reheating of the meals provided, along with the intended components for each meal type and the serving sizes if bulk items are offered. Sponsors may choose to implement an ordering system, allowing families to order meals for their children and set the day for pickup. But again, remember that if you're providing meals off-site for several days at a time, whether unitized or bulk meals, sponsors must count those meals on the day intended for consumption. Any SFSP sponsor who wishes to provide meals non-congregately must complete and submit a Meal Distribution Plan, or MDP. This form can be found on the ODE C&P COVID-19 webpage under SFSP Resources. The form will ask sponsors to complete information about their organization, who they serve, and their non-congregate meal plan. If your organization was approved for a meal distribution plan in fiscal year 2020, such as grab-and-go, bus routes, or home delivery, you'll only need to complete a new MDP for 2021 if anything has changed from your previous approvals. For those that will have on-site and off-site meal options, you have an opportunity to think about all of the previous considerations that we've discussed, but there will be some additional pieces that will need some thought. If you plan to operate with some participants on-site, as well as providing non-congregate meals to participants off-site, you'll need to think about logistics, most especially if you have a grab-and-go or pickup site in the same location where you'll have participants arriving for on-site instruction. Think about where and when meal pickup will take place. Will it overlap times when participants may be dropped off or picked up? This could create an issue with stable groups or contact. So ensuring that these two events happen at different times or from different locations will be important. Consider that you will need different procedures for each type of meal service so that staff will know the expectations of point of service, meal counts, safety and sanitation, etc. Different staff may need to manage the non-congregate meal service than those that are managing the on-site service. And 2 or more different types of meals may need to be prepared. That doesn't mean that different components would be included, but you may need to prepare meals to be served restaurant style or in the classroom, while others may be served via to-go containers or even in bulk. Working through all of these possible instances will help in preparing for your programs. Next, of course, is meal service and food preparation. USDA has emphasized that meals served must meet all meal pattern requirements for the SFSP to the greatest extent practicable. What we do know, however, is that shortages have and will continue to happen. In the initial months of closures, we saw evidence of this in limits on products like milk, meat, and bread in grocery stores. We've also seen dwindling supplies of prepackaged items, which may mean that staff have to individually portion items themselves. The good news is that the meal pattern flexibility waiver has been extended for fiscal year 2020-2021. If operators have an issue in meeting meal pattern due to shortage, safety issues, or other reasons, they may submit a meal pattern waiver request. The form for this is found on the ODE C&P COVID-19 webpage. Sponsors should request meal pattern waivers once they know that they're unable to meet meal pattern. These should not be submitted preemptively. Meal pattern waiver requests will be approved on a case-by-case basis. If you have questions, you may contact your child nutrition specialist for further clarification. Another critical step is to create a meal counting and claiming procedure. Remember that many of the program requirements remain in full force during these times, and accuracy in meal counting and claiming needs to be maintained in all meal service models. There must be a clear point of service. For those providing grab-and-go meals, it might be at the point where the guardian or child picks up the meal. For those that are serving participants on-site, it may be when the participant receives the full meal in a classroom or goes through a cafeteria line. If meal times are staggered, there may need to be several point-of-service counts by participant. The point to remember is that regardless of the method of meal service, the requirement of providing one meal per meal type per child per day still remains. If your organization chooses to provide multiple days' worth of meals at one time, you'll still be required to count each meal on the day for which it was intended for consumption. For instance, if you're delivering 3 days' worth of meals on Monday, your records will show that you provided a meal for Monday, a meal for Tuesday, and a meal for Wednesday. Your monthly menu will also need to show each day's intended menu. Most importantly, meal count records must be dated, and the meal counts must be clearly indicated on the form, whether it be a tally sheet or whether it be an actual meal count form. If a tally sheet does not have enough numbers listed for the number of meals you're serving, please make sure to add a second meal count sheet and add the remainder of the meal counts to this sheet. Ensure that both sheets are dated and stapled together. All of these steps will provide clear meal count documentation should the information be requested as part of an administrative review. There are no flexibilities waiving the requirement that participants with disabilities be provided meal modifications as required by a submitted medical statement. It's important that sponsors consider how they will communicate this availability to families and how they'll ensure that the appropriate modifications are made and provided to those participants. Work with your child nutrition specialist on specific concerns. Under SFSP regulations, offer versus serve must allow a participant to select or decline any of the required components of a meal. With current safety and sanitation requirements, this may be very difficult for sponsors. It's important to understand that providing a participant with a fully bagged meal and only the option to accept or decline milk does not meet offer versus serve requirements in the SFSP. If sponsors would like to elect OVS for their SFSP sites, they will be required to submit a plan to their child nutrition specialist detailing how they'll provide participants with the option to select or decline any of the required components of the meal. The specialist will work with the sponsor to determine approval of the plan. USDA did extend the nationwide waiver of on-site monitoring requirements for SFSP sponsors, but the monitoring requirements themselves must still be completed to the greatest extent practicable in an off-site setting. Monitoring visits for any site that is new to SFSP include a pre-approval, first-week site visit, and 4-week site review. If a sponsor has a returning site and they're in good standing, then they may apply for a first week visit waiver for those sites. This can be done on the site information sheet in C&P Web. If the waiver is approved, the sponsor will then only need to complete the 4-week site review for those returning sites. Part of the 4-week site review is a meal observation. If the review is conducted off-site, the meal observation can take place by requiring the site to submit photos of the meal and service that day or doing a live view of the service through FaceTime, Skype, or another live application. If you have any questions about SFSP monitoring, please reach out to your child nutrition specialist. As sponsors move through fiscal year 2021, they will need to review their organization's information in C&P Web. If there's been a change in personnel and someone new needs to have access to C&P Web, please fill out the user authorization request and submit it to ODE. If a user is no longer with a sponsor, please fill out and submit the user authorization termination form. These forms are found on the Packet tab of the SFSP C&P Web Sponsor Summary page. Please note, it is illegal to share a username and password to access C&P Web. Sites that were added in September of 2020 may have been determined to be in claiming clusters. In these situations, a hub site was identified in C&P Web, and newly added sites were considered to be a part of a claiming cluster under those hub sites. For fiscal year 21, all sites that are part of these claiming clusters must now be added to C&P Web, and sponsors will need to submit add site forms. If the site was in a claiming cluster but does not plan to continue into fiscal year 21, a site add form is not needed. Site adds are not required for pickup locations that are located on a bus route. Any bus routes that are added to SFSP for fiscal year 21 must be submitted to ODE C&P as part of the meal distribution plan. Any sites added to SFSP will be evaluated for their proximity to other serving sites to avoid unnecessary overlap of meal services and to ensure integrity of the program. Any site that is less than a mile in distance from an already established serving site will require additional information to justify its need in the program. If further information is needed from a sponsor, specialists will be in touch to gather that information. Any site that is below the eligibility requirements for SFSP must be submitted under an area eligibility waiver request. The request form can be filled out online and will allow sponsors to detail why the site should be added as a site for SFSP. When answering the questions for the waiver request, it's important to think about the economic health of the area being fed by that site, the proximity to other sites, and ease for participants in reaching those sites. Finally, the ODE C&P school team is working with the community team to ensure that SFSP renewals are reviewed and approved. The school team will be working with our school district sponsors on their C&P Web information sheets and offline forms. If you're unsure of which specialist to contact, you'll find the name and phone number of that specialist in C&P Web at the top of your application's packet tab. Based on a nationwide waiver of on-site monitoring requirements for state agencies, reviews for program year 2020-2021 will be conducted as desk audits. A desk audit will involve the submission and review of documentation as well as interviews with key sponsor staff through virtual meeting platforms. ODE child nutrition specialists will be in touch with those sponsors that are scheduled for reviews in program year 2021. Next, let's move on to USDA's Civil Rights Requirements and Child Nutrition Programs training. This training presentation is developed and provided by the Oregon Department of Education. The session is a review of the USDA Civil Rights Requirements for Child Nutrition Programs. All sponsors of child nutrition programs must comply with the Federal Civil Rights Program as part of their agreement with the Oregon Department of Education. Civil rights requirements are intended to ensure benefits of child nutrition programs are made available to all eligible participants in a non-discriminatory manner. All sponsors receiving federal monies must implement the civil rights requirements to be eligible for the program. Discrimination is defined as different treatment to people which makes a distinction of one person or a group of persons from others, either intentionally, by neglect, or by the actions or lack of actions based on the protected classes. The federal government, including USDA, has the following protected classes: race, color, national origin, sex, age, and disability. Discrimination can be easily remembered by thinking of the 4 Ds. Discrimination is when an individual or group of individuals are delayed receiving benefits or services that others received, denied benefits or services that others receive, treated differently than others to their disadvantage, and giving disparate treatment, something which does not seem discriminatory but has discriminatory impact in practice. This slide shows the long version of the non-discrimination statement. Sponsors must use the long non-discrimination statement on all publications that are over 1 page long that mention USDA child nutrition programs. 1 page equals 8.5 by 11 front and back. The USDA non-discrimination long statement contains numerous protected classes, which will not apply to all programs. The 6 protected classes relevant to Oregon child nutrition programs remain limited to race, color, national origin, sex, age, and disability. The short version of the non-discrimination statement is shown on this slide and reads, "This institution is an equal opportunity provider." Federal regulations allow use of a shorter non-discrimination statement on program materials mentioning USDA or child nutrition programs if those materials are 1 page or less in length. Again, 1 page equals 8.5 by 11 front and back. This may be seen on brochures, coupons, electric benefit cards, menus, and flyers. The short statement must be the same size print as the text of the document. Sponsors must use the statement exactly as written and should not replace the words "this institution" with the name of their organization. USDA produces a poster with the long and short non-discrimination statements in English and Spanish. Sponsors must place the current and Justice for All poster in a conspicuous area. The poster must be visible to the potential and participating program recipients, such as children, students, and adults in daycare, as well as to teachers, caregivers, and parents. Sponsors may request posters from the ODE CNP office. Failure to post the current poster will be a finding during a review. The And Justice for All poster must be displayed at all locations where meals are being served or distributed. The non-discrimination statement must be included on program materials such as enrollment forms, menus, employee handbooks, newsletters, brochures, parent or student handbooks, print or broadcast ads, flyers, and websites. Sponsors are to collect racial and ethnic data annually and maintain the data on file. Oregon Department of Education child nutrition programs may require to see this information at any time. Additionally, ODE-CNP will review the racial and ethnic data during administrative reviews. Please do not send racial and ethnic data to ODE-CNP unless requested. The Summer Food Service Program has specific forms to report the information and keep in your files. The form can be found on the ODE-CNP Civil Rights webpage. An important point to note regarding racial and ethnic data collection is that it is optional for participants to provide you with racial and ethnic information. However, it is a requirement for sponsors to collect and maintain racial and ethnic data on an annual basis. If the racial ethnic information is not provided by the household, sponsors' knowledge of the participant's ethnicity and race or visual identification may be used to determine a participant's racial ethnic category. School districts may also use student enrollment information. Racial and ethnic data collection is a two-step process. Separate categories will be used when collecting and reporting race and ethnicity of participants. You may collect this information either from enrollment records or actual attendance. The information is recorded from a specific point in time, for instance, 1 day or 1 month, depending on what information you have available to you. Ethnicity is determined first, then racial designations second. Sponsors should provide and document civil rights training for staff annually and train new staff on civil rights when they start their position. This training will provide staff with an understanding of civil rights compliance requirements, including how to identify and handle complaints according to the procedures, as well as understanding that individuals have the right to file a complaint. Child nutrition sponsors must provide reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities. A disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more of an individual's major life activities, has a record of such an impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. Disabilities are defined based on Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, and Part B of Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Some examples include orthopedic, visual, speech, hearing impairments, epilepsy, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, cancer, heart disease, food anaphylaxis, which is a severe food allergy, and metabolic diseases such as diabetes. Sponsors are required to provide reasonable accommodations regarding facilities for participants with disabilities. Examples of facility accommodations include accessible parking lots, entrances and exits, halls, elevators, restrooms, service animals, and alternative arrangements for service. Sponsors must also provide appropriate information in alternative formats for persons with disabilities, such as materials in Braille and sign language interpreters. Sponsors must also provide food substitutions for students with disabilities when documented in writing by a licensed physician or state-licensed healthcare professional. USDA also has special rules that apply to milk substitutions for children with special dietary needs. The Oregon Department of Education Child Nutrition Program staff will review sponsors to ensure compliance with the civil rights requirements. Before approving a sponsor for participation in child nutrition programs, a pre-approval review will be conducted. At this time, civil rights compliance is evaluated to determine if the applicant is in compliance with USDA requirements. These requirements are also reviewed as part of the administrative reviews for participating child nutrition sponsors. If ODE-CNP identifies civil rights concerns, an additional review could be conducted. If a civil rights finding is made during a review, the sponsor will be notified in writing and given an opportunity to correct. Steps will be taken immediately to obtain voluntary compliance. For example, if the "And Justice for All" poster is not posted, the sponsor will have the opportunity to post it during the review. In some cases, immediate compliance will not be possible, and the sponsor will need to submit documentation, such as a procedure or training documentation, within 30 days of receiving written notice. If a corrective action is not completed within 60 days of the finding, the Oregon Department of Education must notify the USDA Regional Office. Technical assistance is also provided to assist the sponsor to come into compliance. Examples of noncompliance found on reviews include the sponsor not posting the "And Justice for All" poster in a conspicuous location, not collecting and maintaining racial and ethnic data, not training staff on civil rights requirements and procedures, not including the non-discrimination statement on printed materials and websites, not having the current civil rights complaint form and log on site, and not handling civil rights complaints in accordance with procedures. A civil rights complaint of unequal treatment may be submitted verbally, in writing, or it may be observed. Complainants may choose to directly contact USDA with their complaint. They may contact ODE C&P with their complaint, or they may notify the sponsor of their complaint. The sponsor must forward all discrimination complaints received regarding child nutrition programs to ODE C&P within 3 working days. A complaint can be filed within 180 days of the alleged discriminatory action. All sponsors must develop a written civil rights complaint procedure and implement this procedure. Sponsors may adopt the ODE C&P prototype procedure located on the ODE C&P website. If sponsors choose this option, be sure to put your sponsor's name at the top of the procedure and then train all of your staff on that procedure. The civil rights complaint procedure is as follows. A civil rights complaint is received by the sponsor either verbally or in writing. Next, the sponsor logs the complaint in the civil rights complaint log. Additionally, the sponsor gives the complainant the civil rights complaint form, or the sponsor assists the complainant to complete the civil rights complaint form if needed. If the complainant returns the civil rights complaint form to the sponsor must forward the civil rights complaint form to ODE C&P within 3 working days. Civil rights complaint forms must be readily available at all sites, including the main office if it's not a serving site. The sponsor must make every attempt to help the complainant complete the civil rights complaint form. Reasonable accommodations must be made for complainants with disabilities. All discrimination complaints must be documented in the civil rights complaint log. The civil rights complaint log must be dated and kept for 3 years plus the current year, even if no complaints have been received. At the end of the fiscal year, please write across the log, "No complaints received," if no complaints were received that year. It's a goal to achieve voluntary compliance when resolving a civil rights finding. However, if needed, USDA recommends using an alternative dispute resolution process. In this process, a neutral third party usually acts as a facilitator to informally resolve a complaint of discrimination through various techniques. It's the responsibility of all sponsors to ensure program access for those with limited English proficiency, or LEP. LEP is defined as individuals who have limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English. Reasonable steps must be taken to ensure meaningful access to programs and activities. Some examples of reasonable accommodations may include providing documents in a variety of languages, providing translation services to those that need help in completing applications, or providing verbal information for those that are unable to read the written information provided. Consider these factors when determining reasonable steps to accommodating LEP. Number or proportion of people with limited English proficiency in a service population area. The greater the number, the higher the need. The frequency with which agencies or sponsors have or could expect to have contact with an individual from a different language group seeking assistance. The more frequent the contact with a particular language group, the more likely that enhanced language services in that language are needed. The importance of the service provided. Will denial of this service cause a serious, life-threatening implication? And resources available and the costs involved. Share resources and save money. Sponsors should provide customer service to ensure equity for all and treat all people with dignity. All child nutrition program participants must be allowed equal opportunities to participate in child nutrition programs regardless of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. So in summary, let's review the civil rights must-do list. Sponsors must offer any child nutrition program in a non-discriminatory manner. They must train staff annually on civil rights, document the training on the ODE C&P training form, and retain that documentation on file for 3 years plus the current fiscal year. They must develop and fully implement the sponsor's civil rights complaint procedure and make the civil rights complaint forms, civil rights complaint log, and the civil rights complaint procedure available to all staff. Additionally, sponsors must prominently display the And Justice for All poster. The non-discrimination statement must be on all printed and electronic materials available to the public which mention USDA and/or Child Nutrition Program meals and snacks. Sponsors must offer meals to all participants in a non-discriminatory manner, and racial and ethnic data must be collected annually. The Oregon Department of Education wants to make sure that our communities are supported in their goal to reach equitable implementation of policy, practices, procedure, and legislation. ODE C&P is committed to equity and excellence for every learner, and we know that that starts from infancy. Please be sure that the latest copy of the And Justice for All poster is displayed. If an updated poster is required, please submit a request to your SFSP Child Nutrition Specialist. Thanks for attending the webinar.